Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today, we will present to all of you about one of the Muslim scholar which was given rise to an important contribution to the growth, development and sustainability of Islamic teachings. His name is Imam Al-Ghazali. So let's continue to our presentation.
Al-Ghazali is one of the Islamic scholars that was born in Tus, near the modern Mashdad in Khurasan and now is the part of Iran. Tus was divided into 4 cities called Tabran, Ardakan, Nuwan and Teroid. The whole area, which today is only called Tus, was the largest city in the whole area in the 5th century. Tus, prior to Al-Ghazali's time, had already produced so many eminent Sufis that Hujwiri called it the land where the shadow of God's favor rested and where the sun of love and fortune of the Sufi path is in the ascendant. The district of Tus itself was the birthplace of many outstanding personalities and men of learning in Islam, including the poet Firdausi and the statesman called Nizam al-Muluk, who was destined to play a significant role in the intellectual life of Al-Ghazali. Tus was taken by the Umayyad Caliph Abdul al-Malik and remained under Umayyad control when a subordinate of Abu Muslim Khurasani defeated the Umayyad governor during the Abbasid Revolution. According to the reports of Muslim scholars in geography and history from the 9th to 15th century after Hijrah, including Al-Yaqubi, Ibn Khalakan, Al-Maqdasi, and Al-Mustawfi, Tus was a prosperous and flourishing city which included more than 1,000 villages. However, after the attacks of Mongols and Timurids in 12th century until 15th century, Tus was demolished and abandoned. In 15th century, Tus was eliminated.
Al-Ghazali lived around the year 450 until 505 after Hijrah, and it was the final stage of the reign of the Abbasids, which is 122 until 656 after Hijrah, and it was about 151 years before the fall of the Abbasid rule to the Tatar. The reign of the Abbasids was an era of Islamic rule, where the official language was Arabic. Its cultural features and forms are Persian. The expansion of Islam that took place since the end of the rule of the Khulafa ar-Rashidin and continued during the Umayyad era was a series of beginnings that bring together the teachings of Islam with various streams of thoughts produced by human civilization. During the Abbasid era, the translation of foreign books into Arabic caused Islam to be permeated with Persian, Greek, Roman and other cultures and thoughts. Finally, the values of society, politics and economy, as well as other thoughts among the Muslim community have been mixed. This development became one of the foundations for the emergence of various of thoughts in the Muslim community. As a result, many groups tried to influence society in various ways, including controlling the source of power with their respective thoughts and the thoughts that they believed in. All this creates division and enmity as well as accusing each other. In fact, Al-Ghazali received his early education in Tus itself. Not long before Al-Ghazali's father died, his father entrusted the education of Al-Ghazali and his younger brother, named Ahmad, to a pious Sufi friend. Al-Ghazali's education included reciting the Quran and Hadith and memorizing mystical love poems. After his educational trust fund was exhausted, he was sent to a madrasah, where was his first learned jurisprudence from Ahmad al-Radqani. At Tus, Al-Ghazali set up a madrasah for students of the religious sciences and a khanqah or Sufi convent for the Sufi adepts. Here, he spent the rest of his life as a religious teacher and a Sufi master. At the same time, he applied himself to a deepening of the science of traditions. His greatest work, the Ihya Ulumuddin, written in his capacity as a Sufi, and 2 other writings deserve mention because they are essential to understanding Al-Ghazali's classification of the sciences, named Ar-Risala al-Laduniyah, and the other one was Mishkat al-Anwar. Both were written after Al-Ghazali retired to Tus.
The scholars of Tus. There are many scholars who were born in Tus. First, Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Tusi, better known as Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, was born in Tus in 1201 and died in Baghdad in 1274. Abul Qasim Firdausi Tusi, or just Firdausi, was born into a family of Iranian landowners, Dehqans, in 940 in the village of Pach, near the city of Tus in the Khurasan region of the Samani Empire, currently in the Razavi Khurasan province of northeastern Iran. Jabir ibn Hayyan, known by the kunyas Abu Musa or Abu Abdullah and the Nisbas al-Azdi, al-Kufi al-Tusi or al-Sufi, was born in the city of Tus in the province of Khurasan in Iran in 721 AD.
Abu Hamid Muhammad ibn al-Taus Ahmad al-Tusi, known as Al-Ghazali because his father was probably as Plina Ghazal and as Hujjatul Islam, the proof of Islam. He was born in Tus in AD 1058. Al-Ghazali was one of the famous and influential scholars in the history of Islam because he presented Islamic concepts in depth without losing their Islamic basis and in a highly philosophical manner. He described the different stages of his life in his famous work Al-Munqid min Ad-Dalal. The life of Al-Ghazali can be divided into 5 distinct periods. The period of his study and early teaching in Naisabur, the second period covering his teaching in Baghdad, the third period of his Sufi journeys, the fourth consisting of his return to teach in Naisabur, and finally his retirement and death in Tus. In his birthplace, Al-Ghazali started his studies in the subject of jurisprudence, but left in AD 1077 to study under the famous Shafi'i scholar Abu al-Ma'ani al-Juwayni in Naisabur. He stayed in Naisabur from AD 1077 to 1091. First, he studied the following sciences under Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, who was Ash'ari theology, philosophy, logic, and the natural sciences. Al-Ghazali in this period has already become impatient with dry dogmatic teaching and began to study Sufism under Abu Ali al-Fadl ibn Muhammad ibn Ali al-Farmadi. Al-Ghazali, however, mentions in Munqidh that his Sufi studies began in Baghdad after he had written Tahafut al-Falasifa. After the death of his teacher Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni in AD 1085 in Naisabur, Al-Ghazali began his teaching career and became a famous scholar known to the Vizier Nizamul Mulk, who was interested in Ash'ari theology and Sufism. He admired Al-Ghazali as a Shafi'i scholar and sent him as a director of the Madrasah Nizamiyah in Baghdad in AD 1091. In July 1106, the Fakhrul Mulk ordered him to teach at the Madrasah Nizamiyah in Naisabur. Fakhrul Mulk was the Wazir of the Seljuks. He was the son of Nizamul Mulk, who had his court in Khurasan. Al-Ghazali taught there for at least 3 years. Around 1110, he returned to his home in Tus. In Naisabur, he wrote his autobiography, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, and work on legal theory entitled Al-Mustafa min Ilm al-Usul. Every moment of his life was fulfilled by study, teaching, and spiritual devotion until his death on Monday, 18 December 1111, at the age of 53.
First, Al-Ghazali studied in Tus. Al-Ghazali was admitted by his father's friend to one of the religious schools in Tus city to study fiqh from Ahmad al-Radakani, one of the famous jurists in the city. The curriculum emphasizes the aspects of memorizing the Quran, learning the basics of reading and writing, followed by Arabic grammar lessons, mathematics, and fiqh. Second, Al-Ghazali furthering his studies to Jurjan. In the age of 15, Al-Ghazali moved to Jurjan, which was known as a flourishing center of learning at that time, located 160 kilometers away from Tus, to study fiqh under Imam al-Ismaili. Such travel in search of learning to study under famous masters was traditional in Islamic education. He has made a note of what he learned in relation to the faith of the Mazhab al-Shafi'i from the teacher in the notebook without memorizing. His period of study there was 5 years. Next, Al-Ghazali hired his education in Naisabur. After he completes his fiqh studies in Tus and Jurjan, Al-Ghazali moved to Naisabur, which was located 49 miles west of Tus district. At that time, he was only 20 years old in the year 473 Hijrah. He studied fiqh, kalam, logic, and some philosophy under Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, who was the most illustrious Shafi'i at the time. He studied for 5 years under Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, and he became mu'id to Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni to assist him with teaching. He was the smartest and the most energetic person and loved to research and study until the teacher described him as abundant of caution. Al-Ghazali was found constantly accompanying his teacher Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni until his teacher died in the year of 478 Hijrah. He also began to write and study Sufism under another Sheikh al-Farmadani. During his stay in Naisabur, Al-Ghazali studied hard until he became proficient in various knowledges such as the science of fiqh, mazhab Shafi'i, ilmu khilaf, usuluddin, usul fiqh, mantiq, hikmah, and philosophy. Third, Al-Ghazali returned to his hometown in Tus around 470 Hijrah in his village and lived there for 3 years to memorize and to understand what he had taken down from his teachers in Jurjan. After he experienced an incident in which all his suppliers and his books were confiscated by robbers while he was on his way home, has changed the characteristic of learning from the form of making notes to memorizing, in which he has memorized the entire of his notebook. With the actions and change that he made, has made him an expert in the field of various science, follow so that researchers have described him as an encyclopedia in that time. Next, Al-Ghazali in Baghdad. Al-Ghazali was appointed by Nizam al-Muluk as a teacher in Madrasah Nizamiyah in Baghdad in 484 Hijrah when he was 34 years old. It was during his time teaching in Baghdad that his excellence of scientific knowledge emerged. While Al-Ghazali was being a resident as a lecturer in Madrasah Nizamiyah in Baghdad, he made a thorough study of philosophy, which means Greek philosophy, in particular that of Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, as well as Islamic philosophy, included Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi. The basic problem facing Al-Ghazali was that of reconciling philosophy with religion. He resolved this conflict by maintaining that philosophy was correct in as far as it agreed with the principle of Islamic religion and was flawed wherever it was at variance with it.
Imam Al-Ghazali was known as a very influential and revered Muslim cleric in Muslim world. He is also known to be an intelligent and productive ulama. He is known as an expert of Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, and Islamic theology mutakalim, expert on Sufism, a Sufi, as an education expert murabbi, who is admired by many great scholars because of his expertise. He lived during the reign of Prime Minister Nizam al-Muluk of the Kingdom of Bani Seljuk. So this is the contribution of Al-Ghazali to Muslims and for all mankind. Professor at Madrasah Nizamiyah Baghdad. Al-Ghazali's period of apprenticeship and with the death of Al-Juwayni in 1085. He was about 28 years old, becoming involved in politics and mingling with the ruling circles. He travelled to meet Nizam al-Muluk, the Seljuk minister, and remained with him in his camp for 6 years, during which time he lived the life of a court jurist. He took part in political and learned disputes and wrote books until he was appointed as a professor to the Madrasah Nizamiyah at Baghdad, the most celebrated and important center of science and teaching in the Mashriq Islamic East at that time. He worked there for 4 years and composed several works on fiqh, which he also taught together with logic and kalam. The most important of those works were the Al-Mustaziri and Al-Iqtisad fi Al-I'tiqad, both works of a political nature on fiqh. Al-Ghazali was a protagonist in three vehement political and intellectual controversies which were raging in the Islamic world at that time. The struggle between philosophy and religion, between Islamic and Greek culture, in which he took the side of religion against philosophy, the struggle between the Sunnites and Shiites, in which he defended the Abbasid Caliphate against the Batinites, and the struggle between revelation and reason and between fiqh and Sufi mysticism. While resident as a professor at the Nizamiyah Madrasah in Baghdad, Al-Ghazali made a thorough study of philosophy, Greek philosophy, that of Aristotle, Plato and Plotinus, as well as Islamic philosophy, in particular that of Ibn Sina Avicenna and Al-Farabi, in order better to refute it. The basic problem facing of Al-Ghazali was that of reconciling philosophy with religion. He resolved this conflict by maintaining that philosophy was correct in as far it agreed with the principle of Islamic religion and was flawed wherever it was at variance with it. As a prelude to his attack on philosophy, he wrote a book in which he summarized the fundamental of philosophical thought as known in his time Maqasid al-Falasifa, that was followed by his famous work Tahafut al-Falasifa. Al-Ghazali's view towards theologians, philosophers and Batiniyah sect. After deeply observing various schools at his era, namely the school of theology, philosophy and spirituality, Al-Ghazali then preferred tasawwuf, Islamic mysticism. Al-Ghazali did appreciate theologians since they have strived with their knowledge to defend well structurally the oneness belief, but Al-Ghazali felt that their proof were not time-tested. If they see a case from one perspective, there will be many perspectives unseen. It means that theology is relative and therefore truth cannot be reached by theology. On the other hand, Al-Ghazali respects philosophers because in his opinion they have made use and sharpened their minds, particularly in learning exact and natural science, but when it comes to theological discussion, philosophy is merely the product of human brain which cannot be always trusted. Aristotle, in Al-Ghazali's opinion, seems to have found God, but after freely deepening it, Al-Ghazali found that Aristotle's thought of God contradicts with religious concept. Furthermore, according to Al-Ghazali, there are three opinions of philosophers that lead to heathendom. First, this universe is impermanent. Second, on the other hand, Al-Ghazali respects philosophers because in his opinion they have made use and sharpened their minds, particularly in learning exact and natural science, but when it comes to theological discussion, philosophy is merely the product of human brain which cannot be always trusted. Aristotle, in Al-Ghazali's opinion, seems to have found God, but after freely deepening it, Al-Ghazali found that Aristotle's thought of God contradicts with religious concept. According to Al-Ghazali, there are three opinions of philosophers that lead to heathendom. First, this universe is impermanent. Second, resurrection does not exist. And third, God does not know in detail what happens in this world. Sufism in Al-Ghazali's perspective. Al-Ghazali is an expert and great Muslim scholar who speaks up for moderate Sunni Sufism, a Sufism which is based on the doctrine of the asceticism of the Quran, prophetic traditions, and the tradition of his companions. He succeeded purifying Sufism from various deviations, harmonizing Sufism with Sharia and making it halal for Sunnis. According to Al-Ghazali, several terms in Sufism should be returned to the original teachings of the Quran and prophetic tradition. After studying the schools of theology, philosophers and adherents of the Batiniyah sect, Al-Ghazali finally chose the path of Sufism to find the ultimate truth. According to him, Sufis are the most essential truth seekers. More than that, the path of the Sufis is a blend of knowledge and its implementation. Meanwhile, morality is the fruit. The special features possessed by Sufis cannot be achieved only by learning, but more than that, they must also be able to achieve inner disclosure, spiritual condition, and rehabilitation of wrongdoings. In Sufism, this kind of activities is also called tahalli and tahalli, namely living despicable qualities and adorning oneself with commendable qualities. In his Sufism, Al-Ghazali assembled Aqidah, Sharia, and morals in a systematic and solid frame. It is said to be solid because the Sufism theories were born from intellectual efforts and personal experience after carrying out intensive suluk, riyadah, and mujahadah. Al-Ghazali was able to bind Sufism with revelations, both the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. His most monumental work, Ihya Ulumuddin, show how great Al-Ghazali's role is. The most prominent role is his ability to construct a milieu that can revive Muslim enthusiasm in study religious science and practice them diligently. His most monumental work, Ihya Ulumuddin, show how great Al-Ghazali's role is. The most prominent role is his ability to construct a milieu that can revive Muslim enthusiasm in study religious science and practice them diligently. Al-Ghazali's works literature. It is difficult to find an Islamic scholar like Al-Ghazali in terms of his scholarship and writing productivity. Aside from being a Sufi who usually tends to isolate himself from the crowd of people, Al-Ghazali also wrote many scientific works. According to the records, no fewer than 228 pieces of work have been written by Al-Ghazali. His writing is not only in one competency, but covers many fields of science such as Sufism, philosophy, logic, fiqh, and so forth. However, unfortunately, only about 54 titles have been found, while others are still not found. Other opinions such as the Islamic Literature magazine state that Al-Ghazali works found that 65 pieces plus 23 pieces in the form of pamphlets and brochures. Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious science. During his lifetime, Al-Ghazali produced numerous high-quality works, among them are the book of Ihya Ulumuddin. Even though this book is not free from criticism, particularly on the aspect of hadith, knowledge and some other aspects related to the practice of tasawwuf, it is still recognized by the scholars as a major work that has greatly increased spiritual awareness for the Muslims, and it is being adopted and referred to till this day. In other words, criticism thrown to the book had no lessened the values contained in the book from the views of prominent Islamic scholars. In fact, Ibn Jawzi, a notable scholar who actively criticized Ihya Ulumuddin, had summarized the book into 2 volumes with a new name, Minhaj al-Qasidin, to preserve the precious content of the book. The book Ihya Ulumuddin is the most revered book ever published by Al-Ghazali. The book Ihya Ulumuddin is considered as a scientific encyclopedia for its field. It contains 4 major sections: acts of worship Rubu' al-Ibadat, norms of daily life Rubu' al-Adat, the ways to perdition Rubu' al-Muhlikat, and the ways to salvation Rubu' al-Munjiyat. The book is divided into 4 parts, each contains 10 books. It explains the doctrines and the practice of Islam and show how this can be made the basis of a profound devotional life leading to the highest stage of Sufism and mysticism. The motivation for Imam Al-Ghazali in producing this outstanding work was upon seeing deviations among the people in adopting the term knowledge except the rulings set by the government, discussions that protected people who seek worldly splendor, and beautiful poems used by advisors to fool the public. The Incoherence of the Philosophers. Another of Al-Ghazali major works is The Incoherence of the Philosophers, Tahafun al-Falasifa in Arabic, is the title of a landmark 11th century work by the Persian theologian Al-Ghazali and a student of the Ash'ari school of Islamic theology, criticizing the Abyssinian school of early Islamic philosophy. Muslim philosophers such as Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi are denounced in this book, as they follow Greek philosophy even when it contradicts Islam. The text was dramatically successful and marked a milestone in the ascendance of the Ash'ari school within Islamic philosophy and theological discourse. In July 1019, at the invitation of Nizam al-Muluk, Al-Ghazali became professor of law at the Nizamiyah of Baghdad, one of the most prestigious colleges at that time. This college was intended in part to train scholars to counter the religious propaganda of the Fatimid caliphs, and Al-Ghazali's appointment at the Nizamiyah was part of it. This book was a series of 4 theological works that he wrote during his tenure as professor of law at the Nizamiyah. The first one was a summary of philosophical thought titled Maqasid al-Falasifa, an exposition that followed Avicenna philosophical doctrine. In Maqasid, Al-Ghazali clearly stated that this book was intended as an introduction to Tahafut, and he also stated that one must be well versed in the idea of the philosophers before setting out to refute their ideas. Tahafut al-Falasifa was the second work of the series. The third work, Mi'yar al-Ilm fi Fan al-Mantiq, was an exposition of Avicenna logic that Al-Ghazali stated as an appendix to the Tahafut. And the last work was Al-Iqtisad fi al-I'tiqad, an exposition of Ash'ari theology to fill the metaphysical doctrine that he refutes and negates in the Tahafut. This series clearly shows that Al-Ghazali did not refute all philosophical science as many scholars believe. Al-Ghazali stated that he did not find other branches of philosophy including physics, logic, astronomy, or mathematics problematic. His only dispute was with metaphysics, in which he claimed that the philosophers did not use the same tools, namely logic, which they used for other science. Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, the deliverance from confusion, may be categorized as autobiographical in nature. Al-Ghazali wrote the Munqidh min al-Dalal at the age of 50. The precise date of this book is not written, but it is not impossible to identify. He wrote it between 499 after Hijrah and 500 after Hijrah, about 5 or 6 years before his death. This in itself indicates that Al-Ghazali was very active up to the very end of his life. Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal is not only the greatest, but the crown of all Al-Ghazali work. It is small in size, but as a document is great in scholarly and historical value. It sheds light on Al-Ghazali's personality and provides unique details about his life, milieu and other related issues. Al-Munqidh has three major dimensions. First, the autobiographical dimension, which is indispensable in understanding Al-Ghazali's work and milieu. Second, the psychological and intellectual graph, which record Al-Ghazali's inner experience, intellectual endurance and response to the power of the moment. And thirdly, investigating the religious and intellectual trends of the time and milieu, analyzing and rectifying them from his position as a philosopher and religious reformer.
Hi, so now I want to introduce about 4 classes of talk in Al-Ghazali period. First, Sufi, as known as Tasawwuf in the Arabic, is generally translated as Sufism, is commonly defined by Western authors as Islamic mysticism.
Some modern scholars have used other definitions of Sufism, such as intensification of Islamic faith and practice, and process of realizing ethical and spiritual ideals.
Second, theologians. Theologians use various forms of analysis and argument, experiential, philosophical, ethnographic, historical, and others, to help understand, explain, test, critique, defend, or promote any myriad of religious topics. Third, philosophy. Philosophy means love of wisdom. In broad sense, philosophy is an activity people undertake when they seek to understand fundamental truths about themselves, the world in which they live, and their relationship to the world and to each other. Fourth, Batiniah, Muslim sect, the Ismailis, in Arabic Ismailiyah, in particular that interpreted religious texts exclusively on the basis of their hidden or inner meanings in Arabic Latin, rather than their literal meanings Zahir.
Al-Ghazali died at the age of 55 according to the Hijra calendar, after a life that was not, if it was productive, wide-ranging and influential. He is rightly considered to be one of the most important and profound Islamic thinkers. After Al-Ghazali, Islamic society and thought entered a long period of stagnation and decline and produced few other great minds. Al-Ghazali has thus remained alive and influential. The influence of Al-Ghazali on Islamic thought may be summed up as follows. First, he reinstated the principle of will in religious thinking and emphasized the role of the Creator as the center around which human life revolves and an agent intervening directly and continuously during human affairs. Once the principle of love had gained supremacy among the Sufis. 2. He introduced several principles of logic and philosophy, despite his attacks on both subjects into the discipline of fiqh and kalam. 3. He reconciled Sharia and Sufi mysticism, the Fuqaha and the Sufis, and contributed to the spirit of Sufi brotherhood. 4. He defended Sunni Islam against the tenets of philosophy and Shiism. 5. He contributed to the weakening of philosophy and the natural science. Al-Ghazali's influence was not limited to the Islamic world. He had an impact on Christian European thought. He wrote books on many topics, and he also were translated into Latin on mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, and other fields. Several books by Al-Ghazali, and in particular in Ihya Ulumuddin, Maqasid al-Falasifa, some his work, were mistakenly thought to represent his thought. He is one of the most influential Islamic thinkers of the Islamic world.
Al-Ghazali was one of the most prominent and influential philosophers, theologians, jurists, and mystics of Sunni Islam, whose Western scholars have also considered him to be a philosopher. The ability of Al-Ghazali to utilize the knowledge learned from the scholars and his wisdom in arguing by presenting insightful views caused him to be admired around the world. Imam Al-Ghazali today is known as Hujjat al-Islam, which means the proof of the religion, due to his contributions in protecting the Muslim world from the intellectual challenges that were facing it. Traditional Islamic belief and practice were being confronted by a rise of nihilistic philosophy and extreme Shiism that threatened to erase change the face of Islamic scholarship forever.
For that, there are a few things that we can get from the life of Al-Ghazali.
First, prioritize the Quran and Sunnah. Al-Ghazali upholds the religion of the religion strictly, the Quran and the Sunnah. During this time, he wrote the Revival of Spiritual Science. Its 4 volumes make up a significant work which weds theology, law, and spirituality. He demonstrated that only was Sufism valid and consonant with the Quran and Hadith. It was the best way. Second, courage in upholding the truth. Al-Ghazali succeeded in defending the purity of Islam as well as avoiding the practice of glorifying the Greek philosophy without realizing it is against the Islamic faith.
Imam Al-Ghazali quotes on success: to get what you love, you must first be patient with what you hate. Those who look for seashells will find seashells, and those who open them will find pearls. That's all from us. Thank you for being able to listen to our presentation. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.